Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for June's Ideal Speaker Series event. My name is Bianca Durant. I'm an enterprise sales manager at Alaska Communications, this year's Ideal co-chair, along with Melissa Sirevog, who can't be here today. If this is your first Ideal event, welcome. We are so glad to have you. If you've attended before, then welcome back. So before we get started, I want to give everyone a brief overview of Ideal. Ideal stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, Accessibility, and Learning. This committee formed about 7 years ago as champions of inclusivity and diversity. It started out with the name WLEAD. It was primarily focused on women in leadership. We have evolved our name and expanded the mission, but we remain committed to D&I education and awareness, supporting professional growth of our employees, and uniting our workforce and our community. So we are thrilled that we get to host the Ideal Speaker Series each month. This event really brings together members of our community. We build connections. We kind of get out of our worldview in our everyday work life. It just creates awareness. So with that, I'm honored to introduce our speaker today, Ms. Rae Ratliff. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Rae. Well, I assume that you've all taken the time to read Ms. Ratliff's bio. I'd like to just take a second to really give a shout out to her, because I just think anyone that's including children at that level, our youth, teaching them the importance of diversity, it's just really kind of setting the framework for us to have a better life overall. It's just really setting up our future in a good way. So thank you for that. And with that intro, I'd like to turn the microphone over to you. Thank you, Rae.
Thank you, Bianca. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. I want to start by asking you a question, and you don't need to answer it out loud. I just want you to reflect on that question, and I'll give a few moments of awkward, or a few seconds of awkward silence to process that. My question is, why are you here today, right now?
Do you want us to answer?
Nope, I just want you to sit in silence with that. So as you're thinking about that, I hope you're honest with yourself. I imagine some of you are here because it's a part of what you're supposed to do during the day. I imagine some of you are here because this is your TED Talk or your podcast for your week. I imagine some of you are here because you are seeking some kind of specific skill development or knowledge-based growth. I imagine some of you are here because someone told you to be here and/or volunteered you to be here. Whatever those reasons, I want to ask you, do you think that what your specific reason is, the desire to learn, grow, and shift, is a part of that reason? Can it be a part of that reason? And again, just a couple minutes to see if those two concepts can marry in your mind. So when I was invited to come speak today, I was like, what am I supposed to talk about? What training do you want me to run? What topic do you want me to bring to the table? And Melissa and Bianca are, it's very open. This is it's an open process. We're really just here to hear you speak about your journey, your perspectives, what knowledge that you gained through who you are, and your education and your path, and bring it to the table. very unhelpfully vague. So I did what I think is one of the most important parts of diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And that was that I started with bringing other voices to the table. I started with inclusion. Didn't make sense for me to show up here and to talk to you about what's on my mind in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, or necessarily what I'm doing if I didn't even consider what you all showed up for. And so I did a little bit of research, and at the end of today, I hope to leave some space for you all to really let me know what you came for. And if I don't address it in the beginning, maybe we can talk a little bit about it more at the end. But I did some research. I listened to some past speakers. I read through what's online, and I revisited and rewrote out the mission of this group: to create, nurture, sustain an inclusive culture where differences drive innovation and empathy drives connection. And I said, okay, regardless of what your specific reason is, this group is showing up to this moment for that reason. That's your goal. That's what you're trying to do. So I'm going to try to speak a little bit to that today. And then I'll be glad to answer questions, share more information as we go along. So as I said before, I wanted to start even this moment, this conversation, with the foundation of inclusion. What does inclusion mean, and why is it so important? By raise of hands, if you know how to virtually raise your hand, who went to Kenneth McCoy's speech last, or lunch and learn, as I like to call them, last month? Virtual hands. Yeah. Okay, good. So Kenneth also talked about the value of inclusion. In fact, he said it's his favorite part of DEI, right? I share a really similar sentiment. I believe that we cannot get to equitability, we cannot get to access, we cannot even make a space for diversity until we actually bring every voice to the table. That doesn't mean that we bring voices into the building, right? It doesn't mean when we look at our organizational structures and we're like, well, we have diversity in our lowest paid constituency or our lowest paid employee base. We have a really mixed group. It doesn't just mean into the building. It doesn't even just mean onto the floor, right? Where are we seeing diversity in the positions that are supporting the office? It doesn't even just mean to the meeting room. It actually does mean at the table, in a chair that looks like everyone else's, and or can serve the individual so that they can access the table in an equitable way. And we listen. We include those voices, because without that, we actually can't move forward through equitability. How are we supposed to know what is going to make something equitable? How are we supposed to know what people need to access if we don't ask them? We have this idea like, oh, well, maybe this group needs computers, or maybe this group needs a better ramp, or maybe this group needs closed captioning, right? Yes, 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 all of those things. And did anyone ask? Did anyone ask? It turns out the only thing that you are the best at, the thing that you are the best expert in your life is you, not other people. And so every time you think about equitability from a position of non-inclusiveness, you're only thinking about it from your perspective. As humans, we are exposed to 11 million bits of information every second, coming at us, coming at us, coming at us, coming at us, coming at us. We can process 40 to 50, not 1,000, 40 to 50, sorry, 11 billion, 40 to 50, period, okay? You cannot see, experience, process the majority of what the world around us has to offer. We have to rely on each other for that experience, which is why I go back and ask you again, can you marry why you're here today with the reason of to learn, to grow, and to shift? Okay, I get it, Rae. We've got everybody at the table. I'm hearing other voices. I acknowledge that I cannot fully understand somebody else's perspective, that I actually need their voice to guide it. And I need to make sure that that voice has enough value in the space that it can guide our actions so that we create an equitable experience. Okay, so I go back to where I tripped up a little bit before about the same chair, or at least the same view, right? Maybe the same chair doesn't work. Maybe someone actually needs to tell us what kind of chair they need. We don't know. We're going to let their voice guide our actions, guide our equitability practices. This is where awareness comes into action. And so we go through, and we'll talk about kind of 3 things to go through, but we go through our lives. We go through our workplace, we go through our homes, we go through our social lives, we go through how we vacation, how we move through the world, and we figure out, based on the people that we've invited to the table and what they're saying to us, we figure out how we can make this a more equitable experience for those people. And then it's through those moments that we create a space where diversity can flourish. It's through all of that that we get to diversity. We don't start with diversity because the truth is we may not have practices that even allow diverse voices to the table, whatever diverse means for us in the spaces that we're in. We have to start with a very conscious level of inclusion. The other part of your mission, where differences drive innovation and empathy drives connection. I loved these 2. They're actually pretty unique. I haven't read them before, so congratulations on that. There's a lot of stats out there about how differences and diversity do drive innovation across the board in any sector of business. However, differences can only exist, again, in an environment where inclusion and equitability are the focus. If you are not in a space where your differences are welcome and you can share them in a way that's equally valued, you're never going to get to driving innovation through diversity. It's not going to happen. The other piece, empathy drives connection. Absolutely. It's how we connect as human beings. We seek connections, we seek similarities because those people, when we feel connected to people, those people are on our team. We care about that person's experience, right? There's a reason why icebreakers are like, find 4 things that you have in common with 4 strangers in the room. There's a reason for that. We seek to expand our pack as human beings. And we protect those in our pack. And we want our pack to have the best experience, even if that means doing something different for someone in our pack that we wouldn't necessarily do for ourselves. For those of us that have children, you often do different things for your children to ensure a wonderful life experience than you do for yourself in the moment, or that even was done for you as a child, right? We protect, we invest in our pack. And so empathy creates that bonding, creates that connection. However, here's the challenge. In order to be empathetic, you have to create space for authenticity. You have to create space where people can show up as who they are. You don't have to fake it till you make it. You have to be able to remove the shroud of professionalism, role, expectation, and see a human for what they are. And again, in order to do that, you have to invite that person to the table. Goes right back to inclusion. So let's talk about, from a business perspective or an organization perspective. And then we'll talk a little bit about this from a personal perspective. What does it look like? What could it look like? So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm always slow to do this, so give me just a second. So here we have kind of 3 things that an organization or a group, professional group, can do to really increase diversity, equity, and inclusion for themselves. Okay. Now, all 3 of these things happen all 3 at the same time. And if you're doing this right, you're constantly going back and evaluating and changing and adjusting. This is not linear. DEI is never linear. It is not something to accomplish. It is not a box to be checked. It is always a journey. Okay. So we look at this. The first one is to create a full organizational vision. Now I'll let you read that for just a second. Now, in my position at Campfire Alaska, and I am going to use Campfire Alaska as kind of an example because that's where I'm at right now. I lead most of the DEI initiatives at Campfire Alaska as the director of operations. And we have a wonderful mission, and we have wonderful visions and value statements. But something that we are currently working on, because we don't have, is a vision around our diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Now, one could argue that our mission, our vision, kind of involves DEI, right? It says things like all children for the greater community, right? Inherently, by saying those things, you're saying everyone. But what I'm asking you to do is consider, where are you actually going with diversity, equity, and inclusion work? What are you trying to do, right? And why are you trying to do it? And who are you trying to do it for? A logistical question. Is your vision the best of what you are now for the community that you're in now? Or is your vision what you want to be for the community that you want to enable? There's not a right answer to that, but it's something to consider. And when we talk about a vision in regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion work, what we're talking about is establishing a way of work, establishing the approach or the mental modality that we utilize to do the things that we do on a daily basis. One example that often people use is the concept of questioning as a way of doing things. Constantly questioning. Okay, so Campfire Alaska has started using 5 questions that we ask ourselves. One second. I love having multiple screens, but then I get lost in my screen sometimes. Okay, here we are. 5 questions. So this is as we go through anything. What is the desired outcome of the project? Easy question, right? What is the desired outcome of what you are trying to do today? Overarching, is this a long-term project? Is this just like, I'm approving payroll today? My desired outcome is that it gets done by the end of the day. Great. What is the desired outcome? Who will the outcome that's in your mind impact, or who will the outcome that you have in your mind impact overall? Now, I have the term stakeholders on here. I encourage you to do some research on it. I've actually changed my vocabulary to using vested parties. Nonetheless, stakeholders is a more commonly known term at the moment. So who will this impact? Who has to be involved in it or have some touch point to it? And then now we start really bringing in a DEI lens. how can those individuals be involved in determining the final outcome for this process or this process? So that's the tough one. Often we have these moments where like, I'm just going to whip through it really quick. It's fine. Bringing more voices to the table takes more time. It takes more effort. Here's what I've discovered, a little professional hint or tidbit. That's not true. At the beginning, maybe. Maybe when you're rusty, just like learning to ride a bike, it takes a minute to figure out how to quickly get voices to the table, how to ensure that every voice is equitably heard and valued and their input is a part of the outcome. Yes, it's going to take a minute to learn how to do it because you know what? As a society and a community, we don't do that. That's not what we do. We make decisions with small groups of people in small groups of rooms for lots of different people. Right? So this is a very counter societal way of approaching. It's going to take a minute to learn, and that's okay. However, when you learn this, what I have experienced is it's this concept of you go slow to go fast. Taking all of that time suddenly to actually do the tasks that need to be done because there is such clarity and such buy-in around the task, it expedites the process. So how can those individuals that you're making decisions for, that you're doing something for, that you're serving, how can those individuals actually be a part of what you're saying you are doing or should be doing or trying to do? Take it a little deeper. Okay, there's nothing that you're doing right now that is perfect. There's nothing that you're doing right now that couldn't stand a few improvements this moment today. Not a thing. Even things you feel amazing about. Doesn't mean you shouldn't feel amazing about them. It just means there's always room for improvement. And as much as we hear that phrase, you should actually be seeking that improvement on a regular basis. Diversity and equity and inclusion work has changed so much over the years, so much in this country, in this community, that if you don't make change and updating a part of every process that you do, a part of every aspect of your job, evaluation of where we are now and how we can do better, you will continue to fall behind in the diversity, equity, and inclusivity realm. If you don't constantly seek other voices and improvements, you will fall behind. So what's that? Maybe it's an annual improvement process. Maybe it's every month you send out a survey to get feedback, whatever it is. Who has the authority to make the changes? Who are we reaching out to? Who's accountable to those changes? Are we actually being transparent? Another little DEI tip, if you can't say what you've changed and why and be open about it, you actually don't create buy-in. So often in DEI, we have these moments, and even in DEI training, we have these moments where we're like, I cannot believe that I actually taught that. I cannot believe that we said that. I cannot believe that our website had that on it. I cannot believe blah, 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 because of what I know now. But if we just do this shameful moment and change without inviting people into that process, you create lack of buy-in and skepticism for people who the change didn't impact. And for the people that the change did impact, what you're saying is, I changed, but I'm not going to acknowledge that I was wrong in the first place. I changed because I wanted to change. It had nothing to do with you. That's not very inclusive. Truth is, it had everything to do with them. Maybe you just should include them more at the table. And the last one is something that you should continue to assess both before, during, and after a process or anything is put into place, and that is, what are the barriers? What are the barriers? We live in a foundationally inequitable society. There are barriers, even where you don't think there are. So keep asking yourself, because it turns out the more voices we bring to the table, the more we find out the way we're doing things is for a certain sector of people, a certain ability, a certain SES, a certain cultural practice, certain cultural practices, a certain set of guidelines and expectations that actually doesn't represent the people that we're trying to work with. Those are 5 questions that you can ask yourselves as you move through your professional spaces. The other piece, or the other pieces of this, are knowledge building and systems analysis and change. Knowledge building is what you're doing now, right? You're bringing people to the table. You're investing and growing your knowledge base around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then systems analysis and change, those last 2 questions really speak to that process. And luckily, we are in a space and time where systems analysis and change materials and contractors and guidebooks are readily available. Pick the one that works for your organization in the moment. Use multiple at a time. Use some for small systems, some for departments, some for one process, some for the whole agency. But invest in analyzing where you are and what needs to change. Because things need to change. That's why we're here. So that's work. What do we do personally? All right, go back. DEI as IED, right? Diversity, equity, inclusiveness as inclusiveness, equitability, and diversity. Equity, diversity. All right, how do I be inclusive in my day-to-day? This is one of those tough questions. So I'm going to give you 2 challenges. One is what I tell children. Go make friends. I know it sounds crazy, but broaden your social circle. Maybe you don't know anybody to broaden to, so go to a different space. Go to a different grocery store. Go to a different church. Go to a different movie theater. Go to a different Home Depot. Go to a different location than you have been normally going. You may not make a new friend there, but what you're going to do is you're going to start to surround yourselves with people that have a different life experience than you. These aren't people in your neighborhood. These aren't people on your regular route, okay? They're having a different life experience than you. And if you continue to do that, that's going to become your Home Depot. Those will become your people. That will matter to you. That neighborhood will matter to you. Maybe you're in a unique position where you're like, there is just no diversity around me. I keep trying. There's just none. I really try. Okay. Multiple psychological studies have shown that if you intentionally seek out images and experiences that negate negative stereotypes, you actually can start to shift your biases. So maybe when you're evaluating what to watch on Netflix, you start to look at whether, like, is this a diverse cast? Is everybody in this show white? Maybe you start to, when you go to, as we were talking about in the beginning, when you go back east and you see the history of colonization in the country, you start to Google things like Plymouth Rock Native perspective. You start to Google things like Abraham Lincoln's childhood home, slavery. You invite things that aren't normally in front of our face into your repertoire. You seek that out. You check yourself. Have you listened to any different kind of music in the past 2 weeks? Have you watched a documentary about someone who has a completely different life experience than you? Have you listened to a TED Talk that you were like, this is going to be a long one, but it's going to get me through this drive? Have you pushed yourself outside of your comfort zone in the things that you can control? There's always something to be done. As I said before, and I'll say it again, we live in a community that is bias. We live in an inequitable society. In order to move against that river, you have to consciously act. One day, hopefully you don't, but today you do. And then as you bring those perspectives into your life, as you bring those people into your life, again, those people become a part of your pack expands, and diversity will come. So why am I here today? Well, I'm here to learn, grow, and shift. I certainly didn't know what I was going to talk about until I opened myself up to what you all had been doing. What was obviously important to you. I'm also here today because I have hope. A little bit about my background, and I'll share this screen. This is where I belong. This is my family. Dogs included. So I'm a mixed kid. I'm interracial, as is officially on the term of many documents now, which is lovely, but not always. I get to claim interracial. That's a big deal for me. Up until my early 20s, I had to pick what I was. And because of the color of my skin, sometimes those selections were changed for me. I have a lot of professional background in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I have certificates from notable universities. I've taught, I've worked with youth. I have an education background that focuses on marginalized populations. I'm a military brat. I've grown up in diversity. I have a plethora of experience that brings me to this table. But truthfully, I'm here because I have hope that where I belong and where, as we have seen from the recent US Census, much more of our country, that where I belong is eventually going to be the majority of where most people belong. So I'm going to pause and take a breath and open it up for questions or thoughts or perspectives or sharing, whatever's on your mind.
I'm curious why. Ooh, I have a little feedback. Vested stakeholders.
Yeah, so I haven't read a whole lot of research on it, but from what I understand, the concept of owning land is a very westernized concept. When you look at cultures, particularly Native American cultures, land ownership is not a thing. You don't own the land cannot be owned. And so stakeholders in and of itself is a very westernized term that is based upon dominance and ownership. And so just as like, for me, I don't think dominance and ownership are like things that necessarily perpetuate diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I have currently changed it to vested parties, but I encourage you to Google it.
Thank you.
What else? What else is on your mind? Thoughts, questions?
You know, there is something, and I'll let everyone else gather their thoughts. But Your 5 questions that you went through, it's
Yeah.
really good. And I could see something like that helping us. I don't think it's a secret that we are absolutely building our knowledge right now. We want to get better. Um, we're learning. When you were going through that, some of the thoughts that I found myself having, and it could just be head trash, is like, how do we avoid swirl? Like when you're trying to, especially on your third, I think your third question was like, how do you involve those that are impacted? Well, let's say there's a lot of people impacted and you involve them. How do you avoid just kind of swirling around instead of like moving forward?
Yeah. So there's kind of two pieces of that. The simple piece, or my simple response would be, structure is our friend. Structure is reliability. And if we have a process that's like very clear, and has a time frame around it, and is readily assessed for accessibility, people know that that's the when and the where. Right? They have a way, they have a methodology to get information to you so that you can utilize that, and or utilize them themselves if they'd like to be involved in the process to change, right? So structure is a friend. My other piece to that is, we have a tendency, particularly in westernized culture, to think so linearly. Even when you said, like, we're in the learning phase right now, like, I challenge that actually, because we're always going to be in a learning phase. You're never going to learn enough to make a step forward if the goal is to learn enough to make a step forward. You're just not. One of the stories that I really like to share around diversity, equity, inclusion work is a personal story. And I have been doing diversity, equity, inclusion training for over a decade now. And one of the things that I used to train in is something that's called code switching. So code switching, for those of you who don't know, is a concept where someone that is in a marginalized group or population changes how they present themselves drastically in order to find success in a non-marginalized and or quote unquote majority group. Traditionally, how most people see it as, like, if a Black person decides to talk white in order to function well at work. Okay, so code switching was something, when I was teaching it 20-something years ago, was something that was almost considered essential knowledge in order to move through the upper socioeconomic statuses in our country. You had to understand, as a non-white person, you had to understand white culture to be successful. If you did not understand and be able to function in white culture successfully, you simply weren't going to make it. You had to speak in a way that sounded educated, which in our country to this day, educated still is positively correlated with whiteness. And you had to understand what the underlying social norms of American white culture were. I explicitly taught them. I'm as a biracial individual, it's kind of knowledge that you grow up with, or being half Black and half white, it's knowledge that you grow up with, and then of course through study and formal education, a lot of that information was built upon. Now, in the diversity and equity inclusion world, code switching is an absolute no-no. You don't teach it. And in my opinion, we don't teach it not because it was fundamentally terrible, but because now we actually have, due to the internet and other things, we have, each of us, a greater understanding that people sound different at home, that other cultures actually have differing values and social expectations. We have, as a community, a greater knowledge that difference exists. We may not understand what the differences are, but we know that differences exist. Before, we didn't really even know differences existed unless you were one of those few who moved in and out of culture successfully, right? So code switching was where we were then. But where we are now, when we tell someone to code switch, what we're telling them is that you have to forsake who you are as an individual and your values in order to be successful in a world that I've deemed appropriate. That's terrible, right? That we would never do that, not with a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. That's obviously, it's counter to that, right? And so, you know, as we go through this learning, you're going to continue to learn more, both from bringing in other voices to the table, but also from where we are as a culture and community, where we've moved forward. So learning does not inhibit action, and spiraling is actually a part of the process. So complicated answer, short answer.
Thank you. There's a lot of things we do at home that we wouldn't do at work.
We all code switch to some level, right? We all kind of like put on that face for whomever. Maybe it's our boss, maybe it's our parents, maybe it's whomever. Like code switching is a part of human nature because you're trying to seek out a way to be completely understood and heard. Where code switching becomes dangerous is when we start devaluing what somebody else brings to the table.
So I'll turn to the group for any questions for Rae. Comments. It was so good. I love that you said broaden your social circle and go to a different space. That hit deep. I live in a spot, and my kids, you heard us before, they went to an elementary school that was very diverse, Denali Montessori. And for middle school, they hopped over to another middle school that is almost completely homogenous, it seems like. And it's tough. It really is. It's tough. We are the diversity for that school. So that was good. I'd love to hear from the team.
Here's a tough question for you, Rae.
Okay. I'll do my best.
So we talk an awful lot about bringing our true selves, right, to work. But as you know, there is always that fear of acceptance, of authenticity, and being misconstrued, right? So if you were to offer somebody advice on facing some of those challenges and overcoming them, and I'll put it on the other side too, right? So there's the person who's coming forward with a diverse background or wants to bring their true self to work, right? So that's one side of it. And then the other side of it is, how would you encourage others to embrace that, right? And make it so that it's okay for them to bring their true self to work.
Yeah. So this is like a new horizon, right? We're coming out of this professionalism belief that like go to work, you leave work, and like what happens at work, what you do at work is not relevant to who you are as a person. And we're moving into a culture and a community where work is now in our homes, and people want to be in a space where they feel that they belong. And so, yes, we have this like mental cultural shift. Where it gets hard is we don't actually have a lot of cultural examples of what that looks like. And I'm starting really broad here because from an organizational perspective, you're like, okay, I actually do need you to do your job. Like, this will not work if you don't do your job. But the when and the where and the how much time are the questions that I put out there. And I say when and where and how much time because our perspective right now on what good work is largely based on a very white, very Christianic foundation, right? There's this foundation of perfectionism, and it has to be like grammatically correct, and it has to be like done in a quiet space. Like when we tell people to focus, we're like, find a quiet space, turn down the lights. But that's not actually true for everyone. It's not even true for people in the same homogenous culture, right? So I think the first step to that is actually, as an organization, evaluating how much space do we give people to work in a way that they are successful or that they feel successful, and stop asking people to conform to what our expectations are. And so an example of this at Campfire Alaska is we've gone to a hybrid model. So we have some days that are in office days that can be excused if that's, for whatever reason, not working for you. We have office spaces, but we're also building community workspaces with like cozy chairs and rugs and like shoes off at the door and lay on the floor and sit on your laptop. Like what works for you? What environment works for you? There's some spaces in the office where like music is playing all the time, and there's some spaces in the office where it is like quiet and the only thing you hear is clack, 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 clacking, right? It's what makes that individual successful. And I think when we say like show up as our authentic selves, we often go to this like, I have to let people into like my trauma and what's going on in my life. And like, yes, that's a part of it, right? Because that's who we are. And like, we all have life going on. But let's start with a basic foundation of what are we expecting of people? And is it really their work outcome, or is it actually how they are doing their work? Because if it's the how that they're doing their work, we need to get out of that. And we need to look at the outcome, and we need to ensure that the outcome that we're looking at, the aspects of that outcome, are actually what's driving the product. What's driving the product is not often, unless you're, in newspaper or something, where the period is in an email. Okay. It's not often like, is this the prettiest design slideshow you've ever seen? It's not often in wordsmithing something, though as a former English teacher, I could wordsmith things all day. But, right, like, what are we actually evaluating as the outcome of people's work, and then letting that drive and be like, oh, they did this. I mean, for me, one of my best places to work is sitting on an airport floor. I travel a lot. I sit with my laptop and a backpack, and I just go to town, and I'm very happy there, and I love all of the movement around me, and I love that none of it has anything to do with me. And that's me, right? And so like, but another person might look at that and say like, that's not a professional way to work. Like, who is this person, right? With sitting on an airport floor typing. So I think that's one of the ways we start to bring authenticity into this space. But truthfully, it's not about, in the same way that like we look at DEI as IED, it's not necessarily about people being brave, right? We want people to show up authentically, but they're not going to if you haven't made the space to do so. On a one-to-one level, if you're a supervisor, do you actually care about your people's lives to the extent that they want you to care about them? When they tell you like, oh, my kids have COVID this week, it's been crazy. Do you say like, why don't you go home, take care of your kids, and get this done between the hours of like 8 p.m. and 1 a.m.? That's when you can work. Great. I just need the email in my inbox by 6 a.m. tomorrow. That's it. It doesn't matter that they're in front of you, that they're dressed nice, that they got childcare, or that they're working and sending an email that you're not even going to look at till the next day. It doesn't matter what time. Right? Are they getting the outcome done? So I think it's our responsibility first to create a space where that authenticity can show up and is honored by action. And then you start to see people be braver. The last piece I'll say is we have to do something that we're terrible at. And that is make space to be wrong. We have to be okay when someone shows up authentically and says like, so you've been doing this thing. It's not working for me. Maybe I find it offensive. Maybe it's like triggering me. Maybe it's just really ist of some way, right? Maybe it doesn't even have to do with me. It's an ist that doesn't have to do with me, but it's ist and it's driving me crazy. We have to take that moment, swallow that pill, and say, okay, that was not my intention, because it feels good to say that. I acknowledge my impact. My impact in this moment is what's most important. Help me to figure out an action to move forward. We have to be willing to shift, to grow, and to learn in every moment that we interact with someone. Do you have a follow-up question to that, or do you feel like that got to kind of what you were thinking?
It got to a lot of what I was thinking, right? I love the fact that you're talking about the hybrid workspace and allowing your people to be judged on outcomes, right? It is somewhere where our company is at this moment in time, right? Is defining all of that, as are a lot of companies. So very appropriate for the timing. So, and even where we are right now with, Ideal and standing that up, right? And how we've shifted and grown from WLEAD to be a more inclusive group and, rebranding and changing the name and the philosophy and everything that goes along with that. So very timing appropriate. Thank you.
Awesome. Yep. And I would just encourage to continue to bring people into those decisions around what that looks like, because, the more people you have at the table, the more you're going to learn about the flexibility that may be needed in ways that you didn't even consider. Any other thoughts or questions?
Rae, thank you so much for being here today. This has been phenomenal. Who have been some of your mentors, or where are some of the people that when you hear them speak or you see them publishing something new, or you just hear their name, that it gets you all a flurry and think, oh, I gotta see what that is. And these are people that helped shape where you went and how you went there.
So I'm going to give a terrible answer. I can give you, if you're an official person, I can give you the two books I'm reading now. One is called The Sum of Us, which is pretty easy to find on Amazon. The other one is called Black Wealth, White Wealth, which is a little bit more difficult to find. So if you are a book person, those are the two that I'm reading. I have this thing about me. I only remember kids' names. I'm terrible remembering adult names. Truthfully, the most inspiration I find is continuing to go to diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings and community building opportunities. It is working with individuals and their individual stories that guide me in my work, and then I'm able to tie that in through very formal education programs, as you saw some listed on my bio. But that's kind of how I move through my work, is really keeping a very people-centered, very inclusivity focus around it. And then I let that drive where I'm going and kind of how I grow and how I shift. I know it's not like the quote unquote, listen to this podcast and read this author and make sure you always go to this person's speech. I find DEI is a lot like politics, where you listen to someone and you're like, that doesn't I like a lot of that, but it doesn't quite line up with what I was thinking. And I need to chew on that for a while. And those things come back. And sometimes you hear the same thing over and over again, but you get a different thing out of it every time.
Thank you. That makes perfect sense.
I have it's kind of funny. I just talking about showing up as your authentic self, coming into the office today for the first time in a while to practice some of our hybrid model. I was walking out the door and I was looking at my shoes, because I have to wear slacks today. I have to wear, the appropriate sweater. I have to wear this. And I'm like, who in the world decided that my job performance was based off of these uncomfortable, heeled, pointy shoes? And I said, you know what? I'm going to wear these sneakers. And if somebody has something to say about it, I'm going to be like, I've been working in my pajamas for the last week and I've been doing just fine. So, because I was like, I'm not putting on those awful shoes. And I know that's not entirely the subject, but it is a little bit, because being my authentic self, those shoes, the shoes that I actually took off to sit crisscross applesauce on my chair while we listened today, really made me feel a lot better about being here today. And I know that sounds, or I guess I'm programmed to think that sounds crazy, But listening to you talk, I was like, see, I'm not the only one that thinks those shoes are awful. And not that they're not great for people who enjoy them, because I'm, like some people look in the mirror and they're like, yes, I love this.
Mhm.
Right. But for me, I dread them. So
Yeah.
it's like, hey, show up as your authentic self. And if I walk into a boardroom wearing some Adidas, just know that I still have the competency level that I would have in 3-inch heels.
Absolutely. I love that example. Do not judge yourself for that example. That is a beautiful, relatable example in so many ways. Thank you for sharing that. I
Awesome.
loved every moment of it.
Thank you for giving me the space to feel comfortable to do it. I appreciate it.
Anyone else?
So would you be willing to come back, Rae?
Oh, I'd love to come back. No, I absolutely would. I would love to come back. You can even specify a topic if you'd like.
We'll have to noodle on that because I really enjoyed our presentation today. So thank you very much.
Yes, it's been really great. I can't thank you enough. You obviously have a very strong foundation in DEI, and everything you spoke to, it resounded with me. So yes, we will take you up on that, maybe with a more narrow focus next time. So yeah, thank you very much. If anyone else has a question, please speak now. Otherwise, we'll get back with our day.
Yep, and I will throw my email in the chat. You can always just reach out to me. This is my job, so feel free.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you so much. Oh, had one comment. Actually, I'll email it to you. Because it's interesting, and I appreciated you talking about how it made you feel having to select between your two, between basically the two people that you are, right? My sister is also mixed race, and she has a darker complexion than you do, but she's like, I have always had to just select white. And I'm like, but you don't have to. And I was like, just select both boxes. Do it. Do
Yeah.
both boxes. And she's 23 years old, and I just had this conversation with her. And so I felt really bad because I'm like, you never should have had to just select one. You should have always been able to select multiple, all of them if you want, really. So thank you for sharing that too, because now I can talk to her about it more and be like, select both boxes until somebody tells you otherwise, and then you argue with them. I am not just the one.
I'm glad to show up to that conversation.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Rae, thank you.
Yeah, I enjoyed being here. Thank you all for this space and time, and for your voice. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.